A look ahead at government and business issues in Pennsylvania, next on Behind the Headlines.
This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Maura, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
How's it going, honoring your New Year's resolutions?
Oh, I've failed miserably at all of them so far.
Oh, you too.
Yes.
You too. I fear that I generally do as well.
And most Americans do.
I think we have a guest who might have been able to comply with his New Year's resolutions.
That's doubtful.
I don't know. We've got to ask. But Patti is here to join with us, who is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council. Dave, welcome to the show.
Great to be back.
It's very nice to have you back.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
And what could be more appropriate than talking about Pennsylvania's economy in a presidential year where, as James Carville said before, it's the economy, stupid. And it seems as if we'll be talking about the economy a lot in the upcoming year. And you're one of the best people in the state to talk about that with. Just wondered, how do you evaluate this past year that we just went through? What were the highs, what were the lows for the Pennsylvania Business Council?
Well, I think while it is a slow recovery, I do think there are signs of recovery. Toward the end of 2011 and now in the first weeks of 2012, we've seen jobless claims going down. We have anecdotal and empirical evidence of employers calling people back, of hiring again, of some new orders. It comes in kind of fits and starts, and it's not as strong as we would like. But I think the signs are there that we are slowly climbing out of this recession. So I mean that's good news. On the legislative front, 2011 was a productive year. There were a lot of year-end and most recently with the first anniversary of the Corbett administration. A lot of stories comparing, contrasting what got done, what didn't get done. And I think there were high expectations. There are always high expectations when you have one-party control of the two chambers of the legislature and of the governor's office. But I think his administration and the General Assembly gets good marks. They had a good, solid first year, especially given a tough economy and dealing predominantly for the first half of the year with the budget. But the legal reform that we accomplished in June of 2011, some of the efforts to rein in spending, to take care of tax policy, state tax policy, and advance the ball on that as part of the budget. Keeping the capital stock and franchise tax phase out going, for instance, moving a little further on net operating loss carry forward. Those sorts of things teed up, I think, a good 2012. I'm expecting another productive year in the General Assembly. There's a few things now we're still working on, leftovers from 2011, but I think things look good for business in Pennsylvania.
Well, we spoke to the governor recently, and he indicated a little bit of frustration with not having gotten more of his legislative agenda through. Do you think there's anything he can do differently? And I think there was a higher expectation given the control of the General Assembly that a lot more would have gotten done. Do you think there's anything differently the governor can do in this coming legislative session?
Yeah, I think people forget that whether it be all Republicans, all Democrats, there are huge differences. There is, of course, the institutional differences between the governor and the General Assembly. Just the way the executive branch sees things differently than the legislative branch of government. There are huge differences because of geography and culture. Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Pennsylvania are very different in a lot of ways, and their needs and their perceptions are different. So I think it may have been simplistic of anyone to think that the party would transcend those issues. I think, too, that every administration, their first year, there's some growing pains as their staff learns their jobs and gets to accommodates it. For the governor himself, transitioning from a law enforcement perspective to a public policy perspective that's broader, So under those circumstances, I think they did fine. I think that if there was learning, it was probably in how does one float trial balloons, test ideas, build legislative support, find out what the sticking points are, and then bargain, negotiate, to get those votes. And I think that's the other thing we'll have to get used to as an administration that makes a cognitive decision, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going
Right.
to bargain. We're not going to buy votes. And that's fine. That's just a different way of than what we most recently
been
had.
used to.
that we're used to,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So, and being diplomatic, so I think though that people kind of understand one another better now, and I'm including that legislative leaders on both sides of the building understanding one another better, so that they can move forward in this year. And I think we're already
It
seeing
was a
that.
growing year on a lot of fronts in the General Assembly as well.
Well, for 8 years, Governor Rendell wasn't able to get his budget in on time, and in the first year of the Corbett administration, there was an on-time budget. Why the difference, Dave?
Well, I think that was a very easy metric for Republican leadership in the new Republican leaders in the House and for the Corbett administration to use as we're going to beat that. You know, that was fair. You know, I'm not saying that accomplishing it was easy, but that's a bright line. You either did or did not get it done by June 30th, and they either spent more or did not spend more, than the previous year. And so I think that gave them a goal line. It gave them a short time frame to work on it. You know, that was only the first couple of months of the administration. And it was clear coming, from the time he took the oath of office that the governor wanted to get that done.
And it gave him a
that's
big
not
success
unimportant,
then.
right? I was going to say that's not
Huge
unimportant.
Success, yeah.
But the other thing is that the Fair Share Act was done at that same time, the joint and several liability legislation, some of the legislation on school taxes and removing some of the exceptions to the limits on a school district's ability to raise its property taxes. So there were a lot of good things that got done.
All things which previous administrations had been working on or trying to pass without any success.
Sure. Well, and there are also a lot of things though too that just go through a couple of phases where they've been in for year after year after year, and all of a sudden the time is right for lots of different reasons. So.
Well, let's shift gears and talk a little bit more detail about our business climate. There's a recent study done by CNBC in conjunction with the manufacturers and the Council on Competitiveness, and we ranked 12th in the study, which I seldom remember us ranking high in any competitiveness study.
Right.
So that, on the face
That's
of it,
great,
that
sure.
sounds wonderful. They used 10 different factors. When you look at the meat of it, though, on cost of business, we were 27th, workforce 43rd, and business friendliness 33rd. So if you break it down, we still have some work to do. What kind of issues do you think is the Business Council going to be working on to try to hopefully bring some of these
and
numbers
as you
up?
know, in the previous years, we've done some metrics where we have done a meta-analysis, a study of studies, where we've looked at a lot of these studies. And this one was fairly consistent. Good marks for education and innovation. They know we have access to capital. We are bringing new products to market in Pennsylvania, and that's all good. But we have a legal climate that still needs work in spite of the Fair Share Act. There are things that have to be done there. The fact that cases get moved to Philadelphia. Philadelphia has been ranked as the #1 judicial hellhole in America.
Yeah.
Cases. In fact, there's a judge there that advertises, come to Philadelphia, bring your cases to Philadelphia. We have permissive courtrooms and great juries. She calls it legal tourism. That's not the kind of thing we want to be known for. Go see the Liberty Bell, but leave your lawsuit at home, please. We have problems with the medical side of legal still. That a doctor in Pennsylvania, if they express remorse, sympathy, sorrow, say, I'm sorry for what happened, that the procedure didn't turn out the way we'd hoped, that's used against them in a courtroom. We have legislation that's been bottled up by Stuart Greenleaf, Senator Greenleaf from Montgomery County, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, for years now. He won't move that legislation from his Judiciary Committee because the trial lawyers hate it. Well, I'm sorry, but doctors should be able to say, I'm sorry, or express some remorse. And in fact, a lot of people sue because they feel like I never got an apology. If I had just gotten an apology, I wouldn't have done this. So we'll actually cut the cost of litigation in Pennsylvania, cut the cost of insurance. We still have work to do on taxes. I know everybody always says, well, how do you pay for that? I mean, my first blush reaction usually is to say, well, it's the money of the taxpayer first, not the government's. But this week, or coming soon, the governor will be announcing his budget, and so we'll know a little bit more about where he wants to go there. And obviously, there are some limits on what he can do this year, but we need to keep moving forward there. And roads and bridges, certainly we have to take care of, and continuing to get our higher education and basic education. We're good, but they can always be better.
There's a contradiction in the study, Dave. I wondered how you would interpret it, and that is we have fairly good marks in education, yet we're, in terms of workforce, we're what, 43rd?
Yes.
How does one...
There's a disconnect there
yeah,
somewhere.
there is a disconnect
Doesn't
there.
surprise me at all, because even through this recession, employers could not find skilled workers, and it's the skilled workers.
It's the availability of skilled
Yeah.
workers.
We don't have the people that have less than a 4-year degree, but more skills training and more education than just high school.
What must we do to address that?
More effort in the community colleges. Chancellor Kavanaugh from the State System of Higher Education is starting to work, particularly in the North Tier, to have schools like Mansfield and other schools start to provide training programs to support the Marcellus industry. Getting away from worrying about just a 4-year degree at one of our state-owned universities, but also looking to associate's degrees and other sorts of training, lifelong learning. 2+2+2 programs where you do 2 years of an associate's degree, maybe later get 2 years more to get the bachelor's degree, maybe later 2 more years with a master's degree, or even 2 years. Really, actually, the traditional 2-2-2. I'm sorry, is high school, 2 years of high school training that leads to the 2 years of associates and then maybe a 2-year bachelor's. But frankly, the master's is possible too for the best. And what students and their parents will find out is their employers will pay for those further education. Get the 2 years in the high school of the career-oriented training and the 2-year associate's degree, and work hard, and your employer will put you into a management program that will include the bachelor's
They'll happily
degree.
support
Absolutely.
a good, solid employee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it makes education more affordable and more accessible that
Yes.
way as well.
Yeah.
But that's a problem. Like Governor Corbett's Workforce Investment Board, Dear Malone, the chairman, myself and other members of that board have talked about and are looking at is how do we help parents to understand they're not failing their children if they don't go on to a 4-year degree immediately? And we know that students are going to college starting and dropping out, taking 5 or 6 years because they change majors. We're sending a lot of people there that's not really the best fit. Or they're not mature yet, they're not ready. Not all young people are the same. They don't mature at the same level.
And yet Pennsylvania and the United States still needs world-class machinists and still needs world-class mechanics and still needs world-class heating and air conditioning people.
Sure. Well, and technicians, for our biotechnology and our pharma firms, we need technicians. We need technicians in the chemical plants, the plastics plants, of which we can bring some of those back and grow those industries with Marcellus as a feedstock. The Marcellus industry needs a lot of people. And there is a perception that manufacturing is dirty and only the people who can't do well in anything else go to manufacturing.
It's a misperception.
They're clean, they're high tech, and they are actually 2 and 3 times the job, the salary that you'll make in a service industry. I think one of the problems that Pennsylvanians have is that the manufacturing is a victim of its own success. But also we have been here for so long. We've been here for 150 years in a lot of these plants, the steel mills, the chemical plants, the plastics factories, maybe 50 years for those, 60 years. And when you drive past the outside, it's the same brick walls. It looks the same from the outside. You have no idea what's going on inside, so you assume nothing has changed. Well, a lot has changed over that 100 years, and it is high tech, and it is very, very safe and clean and a great place to work. But we don't always know that. It is no different than a university. We drive past a university and say, well, gee, it's the same might be on the walls. There must be nothing different going on inside, and education has changed as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for starting out this new part of the year with us, and we look forward to your next visit,
Great.
Dave.
Great to be
Okay.
back. Thanks.
We'll be back with the second part of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Hi, welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. And on the second segment, we're lucky enough to have Dave Sanko with us, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Township Supervisors Association. Dave, welcome back to the show. It's nice to have you.
Hey, Mar.
Why, goodness, we haven't talked to you this year yet of 2012. And we just wondered if you would give us your reflection on what the association accomplished in the first year of the Corbett administration.
I think first and foremost, I think one of the things that we were especially pleased with 2011 was the return of fiscal sanity to Harrisburg in the budgeting process. And in part, one of the reasons we were pleased is because it finally mimicked what townships have been doing for quite a long time. And that's been doing more with less and only spending what you have and making priority judgments. And no one likes to raise taxes, and everyone wants services, but you've got to find that balance. And the governor made an early commitment to have a budget that dealt with reducing spending and not raising taxes. And that's what our folks have been doing for a very long time.
On time.
And on time,
Yeah.
which is first time in almost a decade.
Well, that's great. Well, as you look forward to 2012, what are some of the biggest issues you think that the townships are going to be facing?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have a great interest in helping to foster a solution for transportation funding. While Pennsylvania has more roads than many other states combined, local government actually has more roads than PennDOT does. With nearly 77,000 of the 100,000 plus roads. So roads and bridges are very much on the minds of local government. It's part of infrastructure. We have a great interest in the Marcellus Shale debate as it goes on, and trying to come to a reasonable understanding of an implementation of an impact fee, and then a continuation of some of the common sense reforms. Things that deal with some of the unfunded mandates that have come from Harrisburg and Washington in recent years, in an attempt to either relieve those mandates or help us. If you're not going to give us the tools or the funding to do it, and we recognize there are limited funding, then take the handcuffs off and let us be more efficient.
Well, fortunately for you, you're actually on two pretty significant advisory commissions that the governor has established. One on Marcellus Shale, and the one on transportation funding. In particular, can you tell us, in the Transportation Funding Advisory Commission, will they be dealing with the state overall, or are they going to go down and look at the local level of funding? And will you get the chance to address some of the issues you're facing?
I think one of the major turning points, because look, the transportation funding crisis is not something that occurred overnight. It's not something that's going to be fixed overnight. One of the major turning points, as we saw in the last year, when we talk about transportation funding, was a recognition by the administration and the folks in Harrisburg that the transportation system is truly a network and a system that includes state roads, and it includes rail, and it includes aviation and mass transit, and it includes local roads. So that I think local government and that local infrastructure was included in that commission, and will continue to be included as we move the debate forward.
Gallup recently did a poll that you're well aware of, and it found that Americans are very pleased with local government and what local government has been able to do for them. Why do you think there's such a difference between how Americans feel about local government, Dave, and perhaps the federal government?
I think fundamentally it comes down to the government that is closest to the people is the one that has the greatest ability for the people to have an impact on, and has the greatest ability to be responsive. You can, if you live in a community, you can go to your township or borough meeting and talk to them about issues of importance, and they'll be responsive because you see them at work, and you see them at the ball fields, and you see them at the post office and church and the grocery stores. As that government gets further and further away from a community, to a county seat or to Harrisburg or to Washington, the further away it goes, I think we have a lot of evidence to suggest the less responsive it becomes. And when that survey was done, I think it showed that 2/3 of the public had great confidence in their local government, and less than half that number had the confidence at the state level, and less than half of that number had confidence in the federal government being down almost in single digits.
Your membership must have been very pleased to see the results of that survey.
Well, I think pleased to see it, but I think also it's a recognition, and they live it every week and every month at their meetings. The residents come in, there's a comfort level, there's a great deal of satisfaction. I mean, we provide a quality of life. I mean, if we look at the census figures from the last decade to today, there are 500,000 more people living in townships in Pennsylvania than were 10 years ago. I think that is a clear recognition of the quality of life that townships provide, both in terms of safety, job opportunities, and low taxes.
Well, you touched briefly on unfunded mandates, and I think that's probably one of the biggest obstacles or challenges you're going to have in the coming year. Do you see any in particular coming, or are you just constantly vigilant for unfunded mandates that might come down both from the state or from the federal government?
Sure. Well, I think, unfunded mandates have been talked about for quite a while. The Senate passed a resolution a couple of years ago, Senate Resolution 323, to set up a commission to review unfunded mandates. And while some will be skeptical of, another committee to study the problem, one of the things that they went through and did was to identify, they were cataloging how many unfunded mandates there are on local government in Pennsylvania. And it turns out at the first meeting, and the staff have been working on this for a number of years, but at the first meeting they came out and said there are 10,000 unfunded mandates in Pennsylvania.
Can you give us an example just for our viewers about what would be one thing in particular you're required to do that has no money attached to it?
I think the paying advertising dollars to advertise public meetings in the newspaper when it could be done online.
Oh, okay.
As one example, where you could say, Penn State did a study that said there's $24 million a year spent just on advertising meetings. Now, that's not on anything other than, that's not on procurements.
$24 million?
$24 million by local government in Pennsylvania, just on when the meetings are going to be. And you could alleviate that at the by doing it electronically, or frankly, you could, the newspapers could do a public service and call it a news story and say there's going to be a meeting tonight.
Which they do a lot anyways.
And
there's duplication of that.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Sure. And we had one of the great successes of legislative successes of last year was the change in the bidding practices and raising the thresholds, which hadn't been raised for almost 25 years. To local governments and the state government had to go through incredibly costly and time-consuming processes to go out and buy relatively simple things. And by raising that threshold from 10,000 to 18,500, it now changes the dynamics and will save literally millions of dollars and still afford everybody the opportunity to get the best price and the best value for the taxpayer.
Oh, great.
In the past, one of the criticisms of school boards in Pennsylvania is that the members who were elected and they really know little, if anything, about curriculum, little, if anything, about educational reform, and they're pressed into service. We find that there was a municipal election last November, and we brought on a new group of township supervisors, and some, of course, were reelected. What does your association do to try to make sure that your members are prepared for their responsibilities?
Sure. Well, the State Association of Townships has, first and foremost, is a member service organization. So we are committed from day one to help with training opportunities. We will, in the course of January, February, and March of this year, conduct 13 regional training sites around the state, 2-day trainings on 2 consecutive weekends, not only for newly elected township officials, be they supervisors or staff, but also as a refresher course for those who have been in service for some time, to update them on what the changes in state law are, on what the kinds of things the rules they have to follow, teach them ways to be more efficient, to do procurements effectively, to follow the legal guidelines, to follow the advertising guidelines, to follow the right to know guidelines. Because we want to make sure, and because at the end of the day, the more things they do right, as soon as they step off the line and do something wrong, somebody's going to sue them. And as soon as they get sued, that's going to cost taxpayers a whole bunch of money.
Yeah.
So our job is to give them all the tools in their toolbox they need to provide efficient, affordable government at the local level and to avoid costly litigation.
Well, we spoke to the governor recently about the pending budget. It's going to be another really, really tough year this year. He's already got a spending freeze in place, is hoping to lift it, but it's going to be a tough year. What do you see coming down in the budget in terms of townships?
Well, I think many of the townships operate on a calendar year basis. So all of the township budgets for for 2012 were adopted late last month. And again, there were places, I mean, a lot of places that said, well, we're holding the line, we're not raising taxes, and they figured out ways to get it done. But given some of the mandates that are being put on them in terms of stormwater and some of the transportation demands, there are instances where taxes have had to be raised at the local level. In my township, taxes went up what seemed to be a large percentage, of over 30%.
Wow.
But in reality, those taxes had been so low for so long. The impact on that 30% tax increase for me is going to be about $30 a year. So I mean, that's not even what's a daily newspaper for one day a week.
Yeah.
So it's local tax rates have been and continue to be the lowest tax rates of any level of government.
Dave, as this 2012 progresses, could you give us and give our viewers a preview of some of the upcoming activities and events that the association will be involved with?
Well, I think we're going to be certainly involved in doing training for new members, and that's not something that just stops after that two-day program. And we have a monthly publication that is a constant source of new information. We have a research and policy staff who are doing, fielding hundreds of phone calls a week. We are constantly traveling around the state and attending county and township meetings to help afford them the latest training opportunities. We'll continue to do all those things. Legislatively, we talked about transportation funding. We talked about the Marcellus impact fees. I think one of the other things that we're going to talk a lot about is job creation and what townships can do as it relates to economic development.
What can they do?
Well, I think, as we look at economic development, whether you're talking to the recruiters or the folks who identify locations, the thing that's most important is they will say three most important things are location, location, location.
Yeah.
And as we went through and talked earlier about the quality of life in a township, low taxes, safe communities are the things that make, our local officials go about the business of trying to provide a good quality of life in a community that's attractive. So we'll continue to do those kinds of things to try and make those communities attractive. There are certain things the federal government ought to do. There are certain things that the state government does. We want to be able to partner and balance those things. There's been finger pointing for years about whose job it is to create jobs. And I think everyone would agree that job is the job of the private sector, and government doesn't create jobs. And we certainly don't purport to want to do that, but we do provide a community and a quality of life and a location, which I think is one of the most important parts of the jobs.
And on that note, we have to end this particular program, and we look forward to your next return, Dave, and we'll see you back here again next week on Behind the Headlines.